December 13th, 2022, the House Financial Services Committee, chaired by Maxine Waters, convened a hearing as part of its investigation of the cryptocurrency company FTX, which collapsed in November 2022. Unless you've been under a rock, we all know about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and the malfeasance involved in there. Okay. The company's former CEO, Sam Bankman-Fried, was scheduled to testify, but was instead arrested on December 12th in Bahamas on several criminal counts, including wire fraud and misuse of customer funds. John Ray, the company's current CEO, which took over that position in November 2022, during testimony at his hearing, attributed the company's collapse to a number of reasons, including that it is run by a group of people he called grossly inexperienced. He added that FTX had poor record-keeping practices and used the accounting software QuickBooks. No shade on QuickBooks, but for a multi-billion-dollar company, it's rather inadequate, which is intended for small and medium-sized companies. Mr. Ray has worked on the bankruptcies of several businesses, including defunct energy company Enron. So Mr. John Ray is the cleanup guy. He is the guy that you bring in to clean things up, to see the unwinding of such disasters. And he was famously was also part of the Enron unwinding, bankruptcy, and what have you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be, as part of a continuation of the coverage here, and by the way, check out our last video on the arrest that we covered. The link is below. Arrest of Sam Bankman-Fried, whom, by the way, has been extradited to the United States. He fought his extradition, but he has given up on the fight. I guess he prefers, and I don't blame him, to spend his time in a U.S. jail as opposed to a Bahamian jail. Again, don't blame him for that. But let's get right into it. So, Mr. McHenry, Congressperson, Mr. McHenry, is part of the, I think it's the co-chair of the Financial Committee with Maxine Waters, and he's going to give his thoughts as to why this was convened and just some general background as we get into this. So we're going to give you a general breakdown of what happened at this hearing, not so much in depth at this point, but we'll be getting more and more in depth, okay, in longer videos to come, because there's so much to unearth here. Let's start.
But the truth. Tweets, DMs, and interviews are no substitute for the facts. And that's why Chairwoman Waters and I worked together to get this hearing on the books, the first bipartisan hearing of this committee in the last 4 years. And we've worked together to invite two witnesses. One, Mr. Ray, is proven to be a reliable witness.
Two witnesses, okay? Mr. Ray, current CEO, taking over, seeing the unwinding. And obviously the other witness that was invited, as we mentioned before, was Sam Bankman-Fried, but he got arrested instead.
Second, well, frankly, I look forward to getting his lies here on the record under oath. Nevertheless, the arrest of Sam Bankman-Fried is welcome news. But it still does not get at the bottom of what happened at FTX and why it happened and who else may be responsible.
Of course, some speculate that there's something rather interesting about the fact that he got arrested right before he was able to testify.
We need to understand the flow of funds between FTX and Alameda Research and the 130 related entities. We need to examine the actions of those who may have contributed to what has been called a, quote, complete failure of corporate controls.
130 related entities. And by the way, there's FTX US and FTX.com as well. And then there's Alameda Research. There's some of these entities that are actually solvent, okay? So they're actually solvent. But the main culprits here are FTX and Alameda Research. That's where the crime was going on.
End quote. That quote comes from Mr. Ray, the newly appointed CEO. And we need answers for the U.S. platform customers stuck in limbo. But our work here, our work doesn't stop there. We have an obligation to do everything in our power to ensure this never happens again.
The US platform is FTX US. That's that particular entity. As you might imagine, there are other platforms where other people outside the US were also participating and losing their money, getting their money stolen by Sam Bankman-Fried. But Mr. McHenry, okay, Mr. Patrick McHenry is kind of telling us, hey, we have people all here stateside in the US that lost money, and it behooves us. It's the charter of this committee to hold hearings such as this to get to the bottom of things such as this.
But let's face it, there's an old saying, there's nothing new under the sun. And it's safe to assume that fraud and fraudsters have been around just as long as that phrase has been around. Bankman-Fried's play is nothing new. We've seen it before. In the late 1800s, when the Union Pacific purposefully inflated the price of railroad construction to line its executive pockets. Or in the 1900s, when the con man George C. Parker was arrested for illegally, quote unquote, selling the Brooklyn Bridge, Madison Square Garden, and the Statue of Liberty.
Great move, by the way. He sold the Statue of Liberty, Brooklyn Bridge, and Madison Square Garden. Sounds like a Nigerian.
And in the 2000s, when it was revealed Enron engaged in a massive corporate fraud and corruption, sending shockwaves throughout the business world. There are many comparisons you can draw between each one of these pretenders and the alleged actions of Mr. Bankman-Fried. It appears to be the same old school fraud, just using new technology.
Old school fraud using new technology. Okay. Old school fraud using new technology. But now we're going to go to the man himself, the man of the hour. Okay. Mr. John Ray, the cleanup guy, the guy who is here to fix things, to work through the unwinding and the collapse of FTX and Alameda, research, do the mining operation, dig through the accounts or lack thereof. By accounts, I mean the records and whatnot. So we're going to allow Mr. Ray to give his full speech, opening speech. It's about 5 minutes. So let's give him that due respect there to give his opening statements regarding the summary of his findings and where we're at this point, if you will. Let's see there.
Chairwoman Waters, Ranking Member McHenry, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for your invitation to appear today. I truly appreciate your interest in this matter, and I hope my testimony can be helpful to you as the committee continues its inquiry into the collapse of FTX and the efforts that are underway to help those who have been harmed. I accepted the position of Chief Executive Officer of FTX in the early morning hours of November 11. Immediately it became clear to me that Chapter 11 was the best course available to preserve any remaining value of FTX. Therefore, my first act as CEO was to authorize the Chapter 11 filings. I've implemented a 5-part bankruptcy plan, which is detailed in my written statement. Our overarching objective is to maximize value for FTX customers and creditors so that we can mitigate the extent possible the harm suffered by so many. The FTX group's collapse appears to stem from absolute concentration of control in the hands of a small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated individuals.
Collapse stemmed from the concentration of power in the hands of a small group of grossly inexperienced and unsophisticated players
who failed to implement virtually any of the systems or controls that are necessary for a company entrusted with other people's money or assets. Some of the unacceptable management practices we've identified so far include the use of computer infrastructure that gave individuals in senior management access to systems that stored customer assets without security controls to prevent them from redirecting those assets. Storing of certain private keys to access hundreds of millions of dollars in crypto assets without effective security controls or encryption.
Not your keys, not your wallet, not your keys, not your coin, right? Shout out to the crypto gang out there. So these guys had private keys, okay, in their possession, no security systems preventing them from moving these currencies around.
the ability of Alameda to borrow funds held at FTX.com to be utilized for its own trading or investments without any effective limits whatsoever. The commingling of assets, the lack of complete documentation for transactions involving nearly 500 separate investments made with FTX Group funds and assets, and the absence of audited or reliable financial statements, the lack of personnel in financial and risk management functions, and the absence of independent governance throughout the FTX Group. The fundamental challenge we face is that we're in many respects starting from near zero in terms of the corporate infrastructure and record keeping that one would expect in a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Still, in just over 4 weeks, we've instituted meaningful steps to gain command and control. And every week, we gain a better understanding of what occurred and the path forward, all of which will be shared with interested parties and affected parties throughout the Chapter 11 processes. The scope of our investigation is truly enormous. It involves detailed tracing of money flows and asset transfers from the time of FTX's founding and complex technological efforts to identify and trace crypto assets. We're in the process of collecting and reviewing dozens of terabytes of documents and data, including billions of individual transactions. We're leveraging sophisticated technology and expertise to identify and trace additional transactions and assets. While many things are unknown at this stage, we're at a very preliminary stage. Many questions remain. We know the following. First, customer assets at FTX.com were commingled with assets from the Alameda trading platform.
So Mr. Sam Bankman-Fried had a hedge fund. That was the first thing that he started, okay? Watch our previous video, link in the description here to kind of where we talked about the general history of Mr. Bankman-Fried, okay? And he created FTX, which is an exchange. And he's taking customer funds. It's your money, let's say, that you put in to something like, let's say, Robinhood, and the CEO of Robinhood takes that money to fund his risky hedge fund operations in his other company, which was getting in trouble.
That much is clear. Second, Alameda used client funds to engage in margin trading, which exposed customer funds to massive losses. Third, the FTX Group went on a spending binge in 2021 and 2022, during which $5 billion was spent on a myriad of businesses and investments, many of which may only be worth a fraction of what was paid for them.
And also a lot of campaign donations, by the way.
Fourth, loans and other payments were made to insiders in excess of $1.5 billion. Fifth, Alameda's business model as a market maker required funds to be deployed to various third-party exchanges, which were inherently unsafe and further exacerbated by the limited protections offered in certain of those foreign jurisdictions. I know that resolution of the Chapter 11 process, as well as the investigation and the cause of the FTX Group's collapse, are of keen interest to this committee and to your constituents. Although, there are many who need and deserve answers. There's customers, there's creditors, there's investors, counterparties, employees, and regulators. We're positioning ourselves to provide each of these constituents with answers that they deserve. Although a bankruptcy proceeding of this unprecedented nature will take some time to run its course, I'm committed to working as quickly as possible to investigate what happened, formulate conclusions, and hopefully inform the committee's work here. I should note that my ability to comment on certain of the matters today will be inherently limited by the state of FTX's records, ongoing bankruptcy proceedings, and of course, the numerous ongoing investigations by the U.S. law enforcement regulators. I look forward to answering your questions to the best of my ability. Thank you again for allowing me to present in front of this committee. Thank you.
All right. So we have heard the opening statements by Mr. John Ray. Mr. John Ray is the cleanup man. He is here, now the current CEO overseeing the Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which he said, it was his assessment that would be the best move given the current state of FTX. So you heard what he said, that basically this was due to the concentration of control on the hands of rather unsophisticated people, Sam Bankman-Fried and his cohorts of wood nymphs or whatever the saying is. And then he mentioned that there are basically four things that we know at this point, which is, hey, FTX took money, customer money, which is a huge no-no. Okay, as an exchange, if you go bankrupt tomorrow, you should still have assets equal to the customer funds, right? If you lose everything, you should still have the customer funds. That is not to be touched. So they took that and they put it into Alameda Research. Two, Alameda Research did some crazy stuff in terms of margin trading, which is basically risky trading, leveraging other people's money. Okay, in a margin trading, you can put in $100 and lose $1,000. That's how crazy it is. You can lose a lot more. You can lose up to 10 times more or even more than that than what you put in. And then because of the market making, okay, and we can look at into the, we'll delve deeper into some of these things later, but the market making activities of Alameda Research were quite risky, especially in non-US jurisdictions where the regulations are not so keen, if you will. Okay, so let's continue here. Maxine Waters is going to ask a question about the separation and the governance. Okay, was there some kind of separation between these things? Was there governance? Was there oversight? What is the problem here? Okay, I think we know what the problem is, but let's hear Maxine Waters ask the question and John Ray answer.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ray, it has been widely reported how FTX shifted customer funds held at the exchange to Alameda Research, which was a hedge fund owned almost entirely by Mr. Bankman-Fried. This allowed the firm to effectively gamble with customer money without their knowledge or consent. If FTX was registered as a securities exchange, several laws would have required the segregation of customer assets and
Securities exchange, okay? If it was regulated as a securities exchange, this would be the case. As a matter of fact, cryptos are not securities. Securities are like stocks, or shall I say more correctly, a stock is an example of a security, okay? And then you, on the other hand, you have things called commodities. Commodities are things with physical properties such as oil or gold or whatever, where you can assess the physical property. The property is granted to it by the laws of physics, and we can determine the value by the fact that we have identified the property, okay, of the thing. A security, like a stock, is a little bit more complex to define what the value is. Depends on the operation. Let's say Tesla stock, for example, depends on which mistake Elon Musk made or what he said today or tomorrow. The prices and what exactly a security is a little bit more complicated. So Bitcoin has been determined to be a commodity. Okay, so it's being regulated by the CFTC. But the rest of the crypto world, okay, has not yet been deemed to be either securities or they commodities. What are they? So she, right, as a regulator, Maxine Waters is saying, hey, if FTX was regulated by the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, some of these moves that he made, shifting funds back and forth, would not have happened. And putting it in the form of a question. And let's continue.
and prevented such clear conflicts of interest. Mr. Bankman-Fried also appears to have tried to hide the linkages between the exchange and his hedge fund. Have you seen evidence of such a cover-up? Have you seen evidence that there was any independent governance of Alameda separate and apart from that of the exchange?
Conflict of interest, no independent governance.
The operations of the XTF group were not segregated. It was really operated as one company. As a result, there's no distinction virtually between the operations of the company and who controlled those operations.
Let me tell you how crazy this is, okay? Now, I run a corporation, Prometheus Engineering Incorporated, and there is a lot of paperwork, a lot of records I got to keep. Quarterly remittances to the IRS, right? Number one. And that means that I have to keep records as to what exactly the nature of what reasonable pay is for myself, reasonable W-2 pay from Prometheus Engineering to myself. I have to kind of document, why that is reasonable, right? and I have to make all kinds of documentations with regards to the contractors that I'm paying and all kinds of things. There's all kinds of corporate governance. You have to keep the bank accounts separate. You cannot be piercing or crossing the corporate veil. You have to keep yourself quite separate, and all these things need to be documented. And I'm not collecting customer money. I mean, by that, I'm not collecting public funds or anything like that, keeping people's money like an exchange. I'm just running a service corporation here. But I have to go through all kinds of due diligence, record keeping, corporate governance type things. And here is Sam Bankman-Fried, shout out to him, out there running FTX in Alameda. And he is just playing with billions of dollars like his personal money. He's playing with billions of dollars of other people's money, not just corporate funds. Not like, hey, Ike went out there and he made this money, or Prometheus Engineering made this money and Ike is playing with it. It's like, no, this is other people's money, 100%, and he's out there playing with it. So it is rather ridiculous, to just kind of give context here. Now let's talk about how bad it is, or should I say, speaking of how bad it is, let's kind of give some comparison here.
One last thought, Mr. Ray. Clearly, your profession is cleaning up messes that other people have made. That's a fair way to describe it. Not messes that you made, but they made. How does this compare in your experience, magnitude-wise?
Well, it's
The worst or the worst by magnitudes?
it's one of the worst from a documentation standpoint. Even in the most failed companies, you have a fair roadmap of what happened. We're dealing with literally a sort of a paperless bankruptcy in terms of how they created this company. It makes it very difficult to trace and track assets, and particularly, as I've said, in the crypto world. It's really unprecedented in terms of the lack of documentation.
Unprecedented with regards to the lack of documentation. Again, refer to my previous statements about how just a regular engineering services corporation like Prometheus Engineering has to have a lot of documentation. You have to have tax experts and whatnot, regulatory experts, the bean counters, the accountants and the lawyers. Okay. You have to have those guys in your corner watching, making sure you're documenting everything correctly. And this, in the whole history of Mr. John Ray doing this work that he does, unwinding companies, this is the worst when it comes to documentation. That's like a paperless bankruptcy where it's a massive explosion without a trace, no trail, no path here. It's just chaos, just a huge shit smear. Pardon the language. But let's compare this with Enron, right? Let's be a little sensational here and talk about the fact that he famously went through the unwinding of Enron. That was his job, at that time too, Mr. John Ray. He's quite experienced at this, and he's going to get asked now about how this compares with Enron and then things of that nature. But as I mentioned, okay, we're going to get more in depth into this hearing because it was about, I think, a 4-hour hearing. Okay, but we're just giving you some of the highlights, some of the main points, what happened, and let us continue.
Those entities had some financial problem or another. They have some characteristics that are in common. This one is unusual, and it's unusual in the sense that literally, there's no record keeping whatsoever. It's in the absence of record keeping. Employees would communicate, invoicing and expenses on Slack, which is, essentially a way of communicating for chat rooms. They use QuickBooks, a multi-billion-dollar company using QuickBooks.
QuickBooks?
QuickBooks.
Shout out to QuickBooks.
Nothing against QuickBooks, very nice tool, just not for a multi-billion-dollar company. There's no independent board, right? We had one person really controlling this. No independent board. That's highly unusual in a size company this is. And it's made all more complex because we're not dealing with, widgets or something that's tangible. We're dealing with crypto, and the technological issues are made worse when you're dealing with an asset such as crypto.
Enron
Mr.
wasn't
Ray,
using QuickBooks.
Mr. Bankman-Fried has apologized I'll subquote here, for mistakes he has made. Based on your review, is there a way to know if the transfer of FTX customer funds to Alameda Research was done by mistake?
It was a mistake.
I don't find any such statements to be credible.
I do not find any such statements to be credible.
The gentlewoman from Missouri, Mrs. Wagner, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I thank you, Mr. Ray, for being here for the work that you're doing. Mr. Ray, you have compared FTX as worse than Enron.
All right, just wanted to get that soundbite there on the books, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so this is obviously a breaking news. This is breaking news. This is has many moving parts, as they like to say. And as the parts continue to move, as things continue to develop, we're going to continue to cover it right here. So what are your thoughts about this? What are your thoughts as to the fact that he was arrested right before he got the opportunity to testify? After all, he did give a lot of money to both Democrats and Republicans, by the way. There are a lot of people out there saying that, oh, it was just Democrats, okay? He openly gave to Democrats, but he secretly gave to Republicans. Now, why would he do that? Well, it's about marketing, right? So if you are the captain of effective altruism, you know, he's trying to brand himself as a effective altruist, vegan, woke type of guy. Well, then the open face will be, I give a lot of money to Democrats. But he's not stupid. He's also going to give money to Republicans, right? So the idea that this is just a left thing, only the Democrats and they're corrupt, blah, 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 that's silly. That is quite silly. Okay, I mean, think about it. Now, there is still that idea that, well, why did he get arrested before he got the chance to do this? Now, quick recap here. John Ray, CEO of FTX, the guy, you know, the cleanup man coming here to unwind this bankruptcy, collapse, corporate malfeasance, complete lack of sophistication, okay? Horrible, the worst that he has ever seen, worse than Enron, he says, where basically the complete lack of corporate oversight was rather befuddling, okay? Customer funds taken from FTX into Alameda. Alameda using those customer funds to do quite risky things and on and on. What are your thoughts about this, ladies and gentlemen? Where do you think this is going to end up? Okay, stay tuned here. Click on the video, which is on the link in the description. Okay, the link in the description to this, to the previous video where we kind of went over, generally speaking, how Sam Bankman-Fried came up. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Iko Gammon. Peace. We are